Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Satirius Sergiu, one of the VP of Sales here at MicroStrategies, and I'll be hosting this panel along with my esteemed colleague Adam Storch, who I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. On the panel, I will introduce Lisa Calico in case she does join. Lisa is an SVP and Chief Human Capital Management Officer at WCG Clinical. She's based out of New Jersey and has over 3 decades of global business experience, with 20 years as a result delivering HR leader and executive coach with Fortune 500 companies. She comes with a diverse experience in hospitality, pharmaceuticals, drug development, and life sciences. So hopefully she's able to join us, as I'm sure we'd love to hear from her and her outlook in terms of from a human resource perspective. We do have Marissa. Thank you very much, Marissa, for joining and taking part in this event today. Marissa is a senior consultant with Wellington and researching anti-fragility and project management and the founder of the Lucky PM. I thought she's focused on working with PMOs and making them critical to the business. She's intrigued by projects and is a specialist in business transformation. I took some liberty of looking at her LinkedIn. She's also an advisor, an educator, a speaker, a listener, an author, a knowledge sharer. But above all else, is what I like about you, Marissa, is you're very human, just like the rest of us. So thank you and welcome. It's definitely a human crisis, and would love to have your input as well. Also with us is our very own Lisa Kavanaugh, who is a transformation leader and executive here at MicroStrategies. So very honored to have you with us, Lisa, today. Lisa is also based out of New Jersey. She has a proven ability to confront and resolve highly complex business, technical, and human challenges while ensuring success through the appropriate integration of critical thinking, adaptability, and trust. Lisa is also very proficient in a broad range of technologies, as we all know, spanning application development, infrastructure solutions, and business processes. So thank you, Lisa, as well. And finally, Niles, hopefully you can still hear us, and hopefully you can see us if we can't see you. Niles is the founder of SAS Collective and SAS.eu.com Management. Niles is based out of Amsterdam, and he advises B2B SaaS companies on how to set up and improve their commercial processes through interim and consultancy projects. So thank you, Niles, for joining as well. Hopefully you're still there with us.
Yes, you're welcome. I hope I'll still figure it out. It just doesn't allow me to share my web.
Okay, we'd love to see you, Niles, if you can join. That would be great. So without, I'll turn over to Adam to introduce himself, and then we'll open up the panel to questions.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it, Terry. So again, my name is Adam Storch. I actually am fortunate to run the business process and content services practice here at MicroStrategies. I get to manage a great group of people, so I'm a fortunate guy. So diving right into the questions, if I may. As you imagine, in my world, BPCS, project management is always a key topic, a real topic. And I guess if you look at the crisis right now, one of the questions I would have for you, if you will, Marissa, is we've always had that struggle. Some clients want project management. Some clients are like, do I really need that situation with project management? I know, and I've read a lot of your stuff, so I know you get exactly where I'm going. If you look at the crisis right now, do you find people more embracing the idea of project management, or is there in such a crisis mode that they almost step away from it? What are you seeing in terms of that end? But we talk about this crisis and trying to move forward.
Thank you, Adam, for the question. And by the way, thank you all for having me. Quite a pleasure to be here with you. And also thank you for the previous panel. So going straight to your question, I think we are all doing projects. Some of us know that we are doing projects, others don't. So we will have accidental project managers as well as more what you can call professional project managers. Now, what I have been seeing from this crisis is a mix, actually. So I've seen, and I think Barry previously mentioned some in his LinkedIn feed that some project managers were now out of business, out of a job. In fact, I've also seen the opposite, which is project managers being recruited to actually manage this crisis. So business continuity and also ensuring that their companies are more resilient. Similarly, I think that it also provides us an opportunity to start being more aware that uncertainty is not something for us to solve. And I think project management brings that visibility also. So we do have limited resources. And I think that this crisis is giving us an opportunity to actually do proper project management. So we are not just working as if we had all the resources, no risk in the world. Finally, what I'm seeing is that decisions are being accelerated. So we no longer need to go for layers and layers of authority to get a project approved because we don't have time anymore. So we need to do it in a way more disciplined in some companies than others, but still project management. But I'm a big advocate of just enough project management also. So I think that that's the balance that we still need to find, and this opportunity is allowing for exactly that, for us to be able to trial new approaches, to try to find that fine balance there. Similarly, when I was talking about making better decisions, the same thing applies to revisiting the portfolio of projects. We can no longer do them all. We don't have the budget. So things that were often fast-tracked, neglected, or we're just paying lip service, saying that we were looking at the portfolio management properly, now we are actually doing it because we have no option. So I think that we can look at it from, how do you say, the glass half full or half empty. I do prefer to see it as half full.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Hey, so Nils, you are the master of the startup, right? And getting projects and getting companies going. You know, if you look at the same topic about, you know, getting things going at smaller companies, larger companies, but mostly startup stuff, what are you seeing from that project management perspective in terms of driving business forward? Nils may be speechless from my question, which is quite possible. It wasn't, you know.
Guys, can you
Oh,
yes, hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
lovely.
Yeah.
Great. So, real quick. So, from a sorry, I'm double hearing myself here. I should be the guy who consults people on the technology. So, sorry for that.
It's all good.
All right.
Yep.
But while we're waiting, welcome, Lisa. Thank you for joining us. I see you've managed to get your video working. Can we hear you? Can you speak so we can make sure your voice is coming through?
Yeah.
Yes. Is it working? Is it working now?
Yep, we hear you.
Yes. Perfect. Well, yes, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Let me just figure this one out from the
I tell you what, while we're working with Nils on that, I got to say, Lisa, Kaliko, if I may, you know, you did a great webinar about a month ago with MicroStrategies on the COVID crisis from an HR perspective, and it was actually a pretty cool video. You mentioned the suspended state, okay, as where we were, say, a month ago, a month in, right? Do you still think we're in that suspended state? And if we are, you know, how do you think we're going to progress to that next state?
I would say that we're probably in two states, if that's even possible. There still is the official suspended state, because a lot of what we would consider normal activities have not yet resumed or resumed yet to their fullest. And, you know, obviously one of the most obvious is a lot of folks are still working remotely, and all of us here on the webinar. So that continues. There's a patchwork of activity afoot among all the states. Certain things are opening, certain things are not. So I think we are still in this varying degrees of being in a suspended state. However, I'm starting to see a lot of activity of moving forward. What does that look like? Planning for reentry. It's interesting. I'm seeing this term, and I kind of have an aversion to it, return to work. Nobody stopped working. We're all working. As a matter of fact, we're probably working harder than we've ever been. So to all of the folks out there who may see that term, remind people it's return to the workplace. But we have all been working very diligently. So I think that there's a lot of planning that's going on into not only what does the physical reentry into the workplace look like, but what's going to be the new configuration of organizations. I was just having a discussion yesterday with someone in my company. It's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle. For example, in our company, we have proven over the last 8 weeks, working from home works. Productivity has probably never been higher. There's also a high risk of burnout as well that everybody's mindful of. But it gets really hard when we move back into an office-based environment to not have more flexible programs that allow more remote work. I mean, again, we've proven entire companies can pivot and run their businesses remotely. So I think there's just a lot of planning, not only about the physical aspects of reentering the workplace, but I would encourage folks to be thinking about what does a new work design look like? What do new programs look like? What do new options for people in all different walks of life and circumstances? What does that look like? Because our hand has been forced by the pandemic. We've proven we can do this, and we're getting better at it every day. How do we take that and weave that into, I hate to even use the word the new normal, because I don't know that there'll ever be such a thing, but I think that there's activities that are moving that forward, if that answers the question. So we're kind of, especially us in HR, we're playing in both worlds. We're still dealing with folks today, sick people in the workforce, parents who struggling to teach their kids sixth grade algebra while still helping run clinical trials in our company. And also, what does that new workforce look like, and what are the dynamics?
That's a very good point you raised there, Lisa, because in talking to some of the clients right now, they are focusing on how they bring people back to work. And what I mean by that is the physical location where they are installing thermometers and temperature recording devices, so people that do walk through the doors, they get scanned first, and then they go through, and they're building, perspex around every building, how to separate the employees 6 feet apart. So companies are actually thinking about bringing employees back. The ones that I talk to, most of them are saying after Labor Day, towards the end of September. Some people are saying June. I'm curious to hear maybe from Marissa, what's happening, or what are you seeing out in Europe from your perspective?
Well, I think people are keen to go back to normal, or whatever we call it, but to see some of the maybe old habits, I would say. Here in Portugal, for instance, we are starting to ease the lockdown just from this week, and I think others are following the same also in Europe. I think it's going to be difficult for us to ever resign to go back to what we were, now that we know that there are so many other possibilities. And I think that, yes, people have realized that actually working from home is possible, that actually we don't need all the control that we had before. We actually can work on our own and still be productive. And from a leadership perspective, I think, and just following from what the previous panel was also discussing, there might even be a leadership gap now that is more visible, because now we have teams that are self-organizing. We have proof that it is possible to self-organize, to be productive, working from home. And I think that we might be some tension if we are to have that split between, or that division between the old life and the new life when it comes to work management practices.
That's good. Now, our own Lisa Kavanaugh, I know you get involved in helping clients on this topic, so I need to hear from you in terms of this. What are your thoughts on that sort of moving forward state as we go through this?
Sure, thank you. I think it was an interesting statement that Marissa made, which was with respect to uncertainty is not a problem that we're trying to solve. So I think, as we look at resilience and we look at what organizations, honestly, traditional biases may be of how they've operated, I think they really have to look and say, what are the things that we stumbled with respect to kind of embarking on the crisis, and how do we really approach uncertainty as more of something we embrace as opposed to something we try to solve, and then what are the things around our environments that we need to really inject to ensure that we can navigate that uncertainty better. In the first panel, there was a great discussion around, our focus so much on work is still in that industrial revolution type mindset of getting efficiencies and gaining optimization, and to the point of it's made us fragile. And it's great to have good processes, and it's great to have a level of optimization to be efficient. But when it's overly done, it actually works against us, and it works against organizations. And I think it's really, really critical to look at the complexities that we are dealing with that are not going to go away. Obviously the impact of this crisis has been significant, but we deal with disruption every day in what we do. And in dealing with clients, I know, Adam, I'm sure, and what you do, never have problems anytime you deal with helping a client through something. And, Cashiers, there's never a challenge when it comes to sales at all. It all just goes smoothly. So it's really embracing the fact that we deal with disruption, and how do we, really get stronger as a result of that, and walk away from some of the biases that I think we've ingrained so heavily into our organizations.
So, Niles, I'm not sure if you're able to respond. Are you back? We'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well, and also how you're advising your B2B clients as to how they're moving forward.
Sure. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, absolutely.
So hear me and see me as well?
No.
We can't see you, but we hear you and feel you, so you're good.
Well, that's good. That's good. All right, then I can relax a little. No, I apologize for the inconvenience here. No, all right. So from my perspective, I'm obviously to date. So I'm basically consulting, or I'm independent consultant for 1.5 years now. It's only B2B SaaS companies that I'm working with, and most of them, well, all of them, are still considered startups. So startups in general are obviously hit, and they probably don't have a lobby, just as an airline has or whatever, to actually get the governmental attention to be bailed out. So, for example, here in the Netherlands, where I'm residing, there's now a discussion of a $4 billion bailout of the KLM Air France, whereas there's, I think, $100 million or euros in this case made available for startups. So in general, I think what has been echoed here a couple of times is, there has been in the past very much a move to make things as efficient as possible, and startups, being fragile by nature, were driven to be growing as fast as possible at all costs, meaning reinvest the cash that you have as quickly as possible, and that's basically biting them in the backside right now, simply because you don't have a buffer. You're sad to, and that's basically what every Silicon Valley guru will tell you, to focus on one thing and execute as fast as possible. And that's really, just bringing fragility into your entire business concept. So what I'm trying to work on with companies, when I see that, for example, their leads are coming from 50% from one particular lead source, or that they're getting 80% of their revenue from one particular client group, then they are exposed simply because they don't have any optionality. They probably haven't built up redundancy, all these sort of things that play into and not anti-fragile way of approaching business. And it's a gamble, to be honest. And now we see how it pays off. To be honest, a lot of my clients, by luck, weren't hit because they're, for example, in the e-learning space or these sort of things that just seem to be doing well, but it's not by choice that they are profiting from this.
Interesting. So then, with that said, what do you think the future of business is?
I think the future of business is simple, that we need to move away from this obsession with efficiency, move more towards an embracing of resilient and therefore anti-fragile companies. And what that means is that's not a decision that necessarily an entrepreneur can make by himself. It's the stock market demands certain returns per year, and it punishes those that don't hit those returns compared to the competition. So it's a mindset change that needs to basically take place on a macro level, in my opinion. And if we were going to talk about more startups, well, then VCs need to also embrace the fact that you can't expect double-digit growth per month and still have and still worry about redundancies and basically have a bit of cash reserves on the bank. So everybody needs to sort of chip in order to embrace the concept of building. I think somebody said, instead of unicorns, build camels, in order to survive basically those rough times.
Niels, I think it's great because you talk so much about startups, and and they are looking at the market and understanding and the needs that are out there and trying to really capitalize on those needs as coming into the market is new. But I think it's also looking at it from organizations that have been in business for a long time. I think it also is a learning experience for them to say, how do I look at my competitors differently? A number of the businesses that I work with, they kind of look at their traditional competitors and they'll say, okay, well, how am I competing as a result of my traditional competitors, as opposed to saying, what are the needs really in the market and how might things be disrupted and what needs are not being addressed as a result of something being disrupted, and how can I shift and look at what competition may be coming from one of those startups that you may be working with that maybe hasn't, necessarily impacted as directly because they're just starting, but are necessarily a threat for them that may be coming that they just can't see. So I think, it's very important for organizations to really consider how they view competition when we look at their own fragility and looking at the unknown and the uncertainty with what might be coming, and really also working with customers and within their own organizations to challenge what are the needs of their customers that may be untapped. That is a threat to their own place in the market that they're not necessarily thinking about today because they're only looking at the current landscape.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was
Lisa, may I add something to that? Oh, sorry.
Sure,
yeah,
go on. Absolutely.
Please.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I just wanted to add to what you both are saying. Again, with all the terrible things that the pandemic has presented us with, there's also been just some absolutely fabulous and amazing examples of companies' abilities to pivot and start up. You're just seeing a proliferation. I saw on the television this morning, apparel companies, the outdoor like hiking companies are now offering, face cooling masks, right? And so, it's a sign of the times. You think about Ford and Dyson. I saw, pivoting from their core products to make ventilators for hospitals. So again, it gets really hard to put the genie back in the bottle and say we can't do this because we've absolutely shown that we can. And I think that that's a great jumping off point for all of us as business leaders to remind our companies and point to numerous examples of others who've been able to pivot and start up just based on all of these unmet and in some cases very dire needs that are in the marketplace. So it's usually not a question of why we can't, it's how we can. And there's just several companies we can all point to and use that as inspiration and incentive in our own businesses to remind our own business leaders of that.
That's true. That's a very good point there, Lisa. Thank you. And you do see that every day, and I try and bring that back into our own organization as well. So how do we, see what other organizations are doing and how can we use that to pivot ourselves? Marissa, from a PMO perspective, are you seeing those same kind of techniques or pivoting taking place, adjusting to the new way of working from home and with organizations going forward?
Yes, so I'm seeing PMOs transforming themselves and playing part in different services that before were not as critical as they are now. And this might include not just providing more direct support to the project managers, but actually spending more time where their use is more beneficial. Like, for instance, rather than just producing reports, portfolio packs that took a long time to produce for someone to read. Now they're actually analyzing what those insights are and trying to be a bit more predictable, if that's even possible. So not just historical data, but actually focusing on what the future might bring, what will be different from now on. And I think that aligns very well with what Lisa was just saying about how companies, they tend to look at what the competition is doing. And I think it was Gary Hamel who said that companies they fail they fail to create the future not because they fail to actually execute it, but they fail to imagine different scenarios, different possibilities. So the invention of new business models and how the PMO can support that, I think, is something that will gain more priority in the months and the years to come, which is about doing all that horizon scanning, trying to see if our portfolio will withstand a crisis again. So how can we become more resilient as a business? And there, the PMO will no longer just focus on execution, pure delivery, just do it, but instead on ensuring that from a long-term perspective, we have what we need, the pillars that we need to be successful. So moving much more from a short-termist perspective and type of services to services that actually add more to the portfolio for the future.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you. Lisa, you about to say something? Lisa Kavanaugh?
No, go ahead. And I was just gonna necessarily ask Nils from the perspective of focusing so much on startups. Does he see a difference per se in his experience with? I know you mentioned that you feel that they're fragile because of the way they're looking to invest, but do you feel there's something about their cultures that may be less fragile because they are startups as opposed to organizations and businesses that have been around for longer?
Well, yes and no. Obviously, I mean, the one advantage that a startup has over any bigger incumbent is, the ability to quickly pivot and to quickly move resources around and just the speed of execution, right? Nevertheless, it's one thing to be quick on your feet. The other thing is to have optionality in the first place and to have multiple, incomes and so on. I think the most successful companies right now are multi-product companies. I mean, for example, I compared it, maybe it's not a startup obviously anymore, but Uber, for example. Obviously, the taxi industry is hit massively right now, but we also use Uber Eats, which is now benefiting from all of us basically ordering stuff to our home. So I'm not saying that it compensates exactly the revenue that they would get from the taxi business, but at least they have diversified their channels, and that's something that I also wish for more startups to do, to create more products and to move away from this idea that you need to own this one particular product in one particular niche in order to be successful. No, I think to have a broader foothold is important to be stable. And one thing that I wanted to add to it, which I think was very interesting, because I don't know whether you guys know that, but I'm doing a lot of content at the moment on anti-fragility in response to entrepreneurship and sales, right? So one thing that I reread everything that Nassim Taleb wrote about the topic. One thing that he didn't mention in his books on anti-fragility and skin in the game was that something that Jim Collins pointed out in a book that he calls From Great by Choice. I don't know whether you guys have heard of it. It's basically a book, very much an extensive study of companies that did well in the crisis. So exactly what we guys are talking, or what we're talking about. And he's pointing out a particular principle that he calls the 20-mile march, which is basically a way of saying that consistency over a long period of time actually beats our need to innovate now in a crisis. So yes, we are all obviously now encouraged to innovate quickly and to pivot in a particular direction. But he's saying, according to research, that those companies that maintained a certain pace, so even in good times, not grow far beyond what you think is might be healthy, and in bad times, give everything in order to get to a certain growth rate, that those are actually the ones that turn out to be the strongest, or to get out of a crisis stronger than those that are innovating all over the place. So it was a bit of an, how do you call it, it wasn't necessarily something that I was expecting. I was expecting obviously innovation equals survival. But he's saying it's not that they don't innovate, it's just that they don't innovate as quickly as those that are, in the top 10 percentile.
Well, I think the both for optimization as well as innovation, like what is that right balance to make sure that we're integrating innovation as well as a level of stability, but not necessarily over stabilizing so that we become fragile. I would think, and I think one of the things you said as far as the speed of execution with startups. I think that for organizations, we need to make sure that we're comfortable within those cultures to allow that speed to allow us to deliver and not be overly concerned if there are things that break as we go through, because that break introduces some level of disruption. So I know, there are organizations that, have that kind of fail fast, so it can break things, but it's okay as long as you kind of fail fast and move on. So kind of just integrating, I think that innovation, but also that speed of delivery, not to the point where it completely disrupts and shuts things down, but to a point that it is constantly kind of applying a stressor so that we know how to respond to them and innovate. And maybe that's part of the blend that you were talking about, Nils, of maybe that's part of the consistency, is the fact that you're consistently introducing a level of disruption so that you can innovate as you're trying to make sure you're delivering, with it for your organization, for your customers.
Thank you, Lisa. A question for the panel. Sorry, Niall, did you want to respond to that, or?
No, I'm fine. Sorry. Thank you. No, it was a very good addition, Lisa. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So a question for the panel. Do we feel that which is more fragile, the startup company or a mature business, in your opinions? Maybe I'll start with Lisa Colicchio. What's your thought on that?
That's a tough one. I would say probably mature businesses. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about the challenges of unlearning versus learning something brand new, just with a fresh white space. And I think the danger in a mature company who's been successful doing what they've always done, we hear this all the time, you're not only trying to learn something new and pivot, you're trying to undo, in some cases, years and generations of doing what's made you successful. And there's a great discomfort in that. So I think mature companies have that double-edged sword of, not necessarily forget everything you know, but tuck that away and just open your mind to something new, or that may run completely contrary to anything you've ever done before or what you believe. To me, that's an extraordinary challenge for the human brain, again, especially when you've been successful and you've been conditioned a certain way. So if I had to vote, I would probably put the bigger risk would be toward the mature. The startups, they have nothing to lose. They've got a great idea. They've got a concept. There's excitement. They're not married to certain things. And there's almost an intrigueness of what is this new thing, and let's roll around in it. You don't sometimes see that in mature companies.
No, thank you. That's a very good answer, very good insight there. Anyone else? Marissa, would you like your opinion on that?
Thank you. Yes, I tend to agree with Lisa. I think the mature companies are sometimes too big to fail, and therefore they are more risk averse. So they tend to focus on what went well or what has been successful, and not be such exploratory and adventurous as a startup, and therefore much more fragile, because, as mentioned, they only have one or two products that have been successful. They only know that way, so they don't have other opportunities to explore different paths. I was just going to say also, I dislike the term maturity, though. What we mean by maturity, are we talking about experience? Because one can be a number of years, one can be very experienced, but just doing the same mistakes, not learning from it. And I think that in many cases, that's sometimes what happens with what we call mature organizations. So similarly, are we talking about maturity because they are international and operating in different countries? They might be, that might be the situation, or they might be also very old, but continuously reinventing themselves, like 3M did and others did. So I was just going to say, use that word with caution. It depends on what we mean by maturity in this case. But I tend to agree with what was said regarding startups being much more anti-fragile in this case.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the question, and I still can't give you, like, I wouldn't necessarily sign for the fact that startups are necessarily more anti-fragile. Yes, they're quicker. Yes, they have more flexibility and therefore can take advantage of certain advantages that are offered to them. But in order to learn, you need to survive in the first place. And I have the feeling that a lot of startups, if you would look at the statistics, are not going to survive this, simply because they don't have a buffer. And even if they have a client or a product that is accepted by the market, a lot of companies will now go maybe more for the more secure option of purchasing IBM instead of your little startup there. So I think it's a 50-50 thing, and it's one of those it depends answers which nobody likes, but it's I think that's probably what you get from me.
No, and I guess
I think you made an interesting point. I'm sorry, Adam.
No, the maturity word is an interesting word. That and I was, you bring up a really good topic there, Marissa. I guess Lisa Colicchio, the word maturity. What does that mean to you? You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting concept. It can be both good and bad.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Adam. I chuckle because it's the age old. We're all speaking the same language, but are we saying and hearing the same thing? And maturity has a lot of context, as Marissa said. Who's the I think it's George Bernard Shaw made a quote, even between the American English and the British English, two companies divided by a common language, just very, very different interpretations of what we think is the same word. I think Marissa's point is spot on. If you're talking about organizational maturity as the framework versus the maturity of the workforce versus the maturity of business acumen of people within the workforce. So I think in these circumstances, when you're having these conversations with your leadership, be explicitly clear and check for understanding. And I think it's a great idea, Marissa, to explore the various nuances of maturity in an organization, the maturity of the workforce, the maturity of the business model, the maturity of the sector and the space that you play in. All of these are important considerations to inform future direction.
Yeah, I think maturity could be its own little webinar, if you will, just to covering that piece. Lisa Kavanaugh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off earlier. I apologize. Did you want to touch base on that?
Oh, no worries. No, I just think I was just going to kind of pivot off of something that Niles had said. I think, Niles, you made a great point with respect to, how the pressures that kind of get applied to businesses, whether they're startups or whether they're organizations that are, quote unquote, mature, been around for a longer period of time, and what the impacts of, say, if they're a publicly based company and what the stresses are, how they have to hit their numbers, or if it's a startup and they have to just survive, as Neil said. I think it's really how we navigate that risk as an organization and how we create that balance, so how the organizations, whether they're mature, I think mature organizations, if they've achieved a significant level of success, there's always a risk of losing that success. So what is the balance between, and I've seen this in my past, what is that balance between continuing to innovate and to, as well as to provide the cushion if something happens, but not to the expense of how you're thinking about your business differently and taking the risks needed to drive yourself forward, so you're not, just doing the same old thing. But I think then obviously if you're a startup, what is that right balance between the risk of being so innovative and being able to get that concept that you're trying to push and that you believe in out, but not to the expense that you actually sacrifice the organization. So I think it's, from a maturity side, it's how is that organization able to adapt and to embrace the risks that are out there, and to as their leadership, to be able to navigate that in a way that allows them to be successful, which is not easy in a complex world. But
yeah, I've heard the word leadership used quite a lot in that last response. So, crises do not make leaders, but crises reveal leaders. So I'm interested in the panel's opinion on that. I'm not sure where to start first. If somebody wants to put their hand up to take a shot at that one, I'll open up the floor.
Come on, somebody jump on
it. I agree. Let's start there.
Anybody?
We had a great conversation as one of our webinars, Satiris, and we asked some of those questions with respect to, what do we see in leaders. I think even Lisa came up in one of the webinars that we were in with respect to leadership. And I definitely think that I think the crisis, and I think when you do apply pressures, it absolutely does allow us to challenge our thought processes and what is a leader really. I think that we put stereotypical, characteristics around it of what maybe sound good or we think, makes sense, but what does it really take to lead every day and lead organizations that just naturally have uncertainty, regardless if we want to convince ourselves, have uncertainty that they have to deal with. And, what are those characteristics that are really important to ensure we balance navigating the unknown with instilling the trust and being able to, communicate effectively and have people, feel confident in the ability of their leaders and their ability to kind of drive the organization and help them feel as though they have their best interests of the organization as well as the teams in mind. So, but I think that there are unique characteristics that absolutely come to the table because it's dealing with uncertainty and dealing with the risks that present us every day are challenges that not all leaders are able to possess. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Sorry.
Sorry. So I've experienced it now with 4 clients that I've basically that I'm still working with during this crisis, and each, especially the head of sales that I'm working with more directly, is a sort of responded differently. And those that were most successful, they stayed optimistic. Not in a fake way or in a way that would feel dishonest, but really optimistic, because I think that's the only way to really push forward. If you don't show optimism, confidence in the future, I think you've already lost. So that was one of the things that I've just seen, that those that because I've also had one company that really put their head in the sand, and it was quite difficult to get them back on track. So I think that's to sort of to halo this confidence in the future, and to just say to the team, follow me and come on, heads up, we can do this, is just simply vital. And it really shows that you're a bad weather manager as well, and not just in good times.
Yes, I think what this crisis is also showing us is some authentic leadership, not just in the way that we have leaders being authentic in the way they are leading their teams, the work, and so on, the companies. So being human, first of all, and we have seen several examples, even comparisons between countries from prime ministers to government and so on, who is showing good leadership in how they are reacting to the situation or not. But at the same time, also, because we are working more in networks, in self-organizing teams, as I was saying, therefore the role of the hierarchical structure and therefore the formal leader, it's not as relevant as if it was before. So authentic leadership also in the way that it makes the leaders emerge from the crisis, I would say.
We have 5 minutes left for the panel.
Already?
Oh, okay. Maybe we can, as we do have 5 minutes, what would your advice be to the people listening? We've heard, I know Miles mentioned the word anti-fragility. What would your advice be for people to focus on certain principles going forward, or certain areas to focus on as we start to move forward? Any words of advice, a couple of sentences or a few words to give people that are listening? Maybe we'll start with our Lisa first, and then we'll pass it over.
Sure. I think that the advice would be, transformation, and the term transformation has been a term that has been used, I think, overly used, I think, a bit in business at this point in time, and the sense of, we talk about it, but what does it really mean? And I think that this crisis has forced the issue of, you don't really have the choice to transform. You really need to look at the stressors that are put on you, and you have to react. And we've talked about that. So I think really for organizations is just continue to look at the fact of what does that mean to transform, and what are the things you really have to look deeply within your organization to change and to confront and really allow the organization to thrive as they move forward. And that's not necessarily easy. Those are tough things that have to happen. But I think it's really just challenging themselves to move beyond the admission that they need to change and really take the actions that are necessary.
Thank you. Lisa, the other Lisa?
Mills? Don't be shy.
Lisa, go ahead.
Sure. I heard this quote. You probably picked up. I love quotes. There's things that just stay in my mind, and they kind of guide my thinking. Never let a good crisis go to waste. As terrible as it is, there are just extraordinary lessons to be learned. We talked about many of them on this call and on the panel before us. I would say, from my perspective as an HR leader, it's a chance to really understand your workforce better. Just think of the whole term essential worker and who really is powering your company when we get down to, how core critical services are delivered. I would imagine in many companies, succession plans, perhaps they did not have folks like delivery workers or cashiers in stores. Maybe as essential, but they sure are. And it's a chance to just rethink who they really are and what purpose and what role they play, because every role serves purpose. I think the other thing I would leave folks with is watch who steps forward. Watch what people do with empowerment. We've talked a lot on this call about there's just several things that are undefined and undetermined, and there's no answers. And I love just watching everybody coming out of the woodwork, and you really learn a lot about how people think and what their skill sets are that you may not have been able to see in normal circumstances when many of us were probably just in maintenance mode. So take note of that. Who really steps forward? What skills did they demonstrate? How can you leverage those skills in other ways? It's just been very enlightening for me to learn that in my own company and to watch people around me. Things I never knew that folks were skilled in or how they thought have revealed themselves. And it's been so inspiring and refreshing to watch.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you, Lisa, so much for that. That's very, very good. I made notes of that for myself too, but thank you. Niles or Marissa, who wants to go? I guess Marissa,
yeah, sure.
Then we'll go back to Niles. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Marissa, go ahead. All right, cool. So Lisa, thanks for the last part that you just shared there. I think that's super relevant to really look at your team and see what sort of characteristics they now show in when faced with a challenge like that. Especially in sales, you also have a lot of people that are now showing their true colors in a way, and some of them are just amazing in how they react. So it's great. I think as a general takeaway, not only in bad times but also in good times, is to really stress test every single department of your organization. Like, my focus is on sales, so assume that your biggest lead channel falls away. What happens then? Assume that your company or the particular industry that you're focusing on doesn't need your product anymore. What happens then? So basically, we mentioned it in the beginning of the webinar, have scenarios ready, and try to set yourself up to be robust, plus to have the ability to actually to cash in on opportunities if there's a particular challenge that plays into your card.
Thank you, Niles.
And yes, I will just echo what my colleague said. So I do think that this is an opportunity not to be wasted. I don't want to romanticize the pandemic, but indeed it brings us some advantages. So we need to be aware of those and capitalize on those, as anti-fragility tells us that we should do. So I think it provides us a good opportunity for reflective practice, as Lisa was saying. And also, I believe that this is not the time to stop now. So we have seen that we can work more collaboratively, we can share more, we can learn more from each other. We have seen projects being executed much quicker, things that in the past took, I don't know, 3, 5, 6 months to put together. We can do it now in the snap of fingers, so just a matter of days to have ventilators ready to be used, to have universities collaborating with companies to build something quick. So let's just capitalize on that, continue to work in this way. That would be my hope. And I do work in project management to believe that projects build the future. So let's just ensure that we are building a good one for ourselves.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our time. Lisa, Niles, and Marissa, thank you so much for your time on this panel. Excellent advice.
Thank you so much.
Stay well. Thank you so much.